Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Savannah Campbell from Campbell Creates Readers. Savannah is a K-5 reading specialist who, for 13 years, worked at the same elementary school she went to as a child. And I just love that story because I also worked at the same elementary school I went to as a child, which is so special. Back in 2022, Savannah was named Teacher of the Year, not only for her elementary school, but also for all of the elementary schools in her district. She is a phenomenal educator who is so passionate about the science of reading, and you are going to be able to hear that in this podcast episode. Her dream is to make sure that all students grow up knowing how to read well. She wants them to be able to chase their dreams, no matter what those dreams are, and that starts with them being able to be strong readers. If you have any questions about this episode, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Instagram at Little Celeb Learning Blog. You can also reach out to Savannah. She's on Instagram at Campbell Creates Readers. Hey, Savannah. Welcome to the Little Celeb Learning Podcast.
Hello. I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me and for bearing with me as we rescheduled.
Yes. Savannah had to reschedule so she could go see Wicked, which I 100% support because that movie is amazing. Now, I have been following you on Instagram for years. I can't even remember when I first started following you. You do so much good for this community. You have shared so much with teachers like me for free. We have learned so much from you about the science of reading. But let's go way back before Instagram and before your business, and let's talk about your journey in education and what inspired you to become a teacher.
Sure. I am one of those kids that no matter what you did, I was going to be fine. Learning always came really easily for me. I don't remember learning to read. I remember I was the kid who wanted to go to school. I loved school because it was a safe place. I was happy there. Things were pretty easy for me. And when I was in 5th grade, my 5th grade teacher, she went to William & Mary and became a teacher. And I remember thinking, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to William & Mary and I'm going to become a 5th grade teacher. And I didn't become a 5th grade teacher, but I did go to William & Mary, and I did end up going and teaching back at the school that I went to as a kid. And actually, my very first teaching interview was with the principal of a school, and she was my 5th grade teacher, and she was the very first interview I had. Wow. And she wanted to hire me, but she said she knew my heart was at the other school, so she didn't fight for me. But yeah, so I've always loved learning, and so I think I became a teacher because of that love of learning, but I became a reading specialist because I realized the inequity that we are seeing in education. And I look at these kids and, they're like growing up in the same apartment complex that I grew up in. And I see them going through all of these struggles, and learning to read is difficult, and it just doesn't seem fair. And so I became a reading specialist because I just want to level the playing field. I don't like the idea of 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds already having life stacked against them. And so if we can do something to change it, which we know we can, that's what I want to do. And so that's just kind of where I've come from.
I can hear your passion in that speech. I love that so much. So how long were you in the general classroom before you switched to being a reading specialist?
I taught 4th grade for 4 years. Then I taught 1st grade for 2 years. I became a reading specialist for a year. And then they're like, actually, we don't have a position for you. You have to go back in the classroom. So then I taught 3rd grade for a year. And then I ended up being a reading specialist for, I think, 6 more years.
And what grades did you do for being a reading specialist?
Oh, all of them. All of them. I always say I didn't sign up to teach a grade. I signed up to teach kids. And there's just something really special about each grade level that I really enjoy. And honestly, I would say maybe 5th graders after April aren't my favorite. They're ready to go to middle school. But the rest of them, like, I just love all the grade levels. There's just something so special about each of them.
And how you can see the interconnectedness from kindergarten all the way to 5th grade. You can see the gaps in 5th grade and how you can fill them in kindergarten. And you know how to prepare those little ones for what they're going to experience in the older grades.
Absolutely.
I think that's very special. So when did you start sharing online? You have a wonderful Instagram called Campbell Creates Readers. You share tips and so much information for free, which I so appreciate. How did that get started?
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about it too in a little bit later. But honestly, I started Campbell Creates Readers because I wanted to be the person that I had wish I had had when I started this journey. I was very much a balanced literacy person. I have two master's degrees in education, and both of them were steeped in balanced literacy. My second master's degree program, I graduated in like 2014 or 2015, and I had a professor tell me that dyslexia doesn't exist. And so I am seeing all of these really intelligent people and these amazing individuals, and we're just getting it wrong. And I just remember thinking, like, if these people that I love and trust so much are getting it wrong, there's a really good chance that there's a wider community that doesn't quite know what best practices are right now because of where we were in education for so long. And so I really started it just to be who I wish I had had. And I've kind of continued that every step of the way. I never want to like talk over somebody. I never want to speak down to somebody. You'll be in some of those big Facebook groups sometimes, and the way people talk to each other is just not okay with me. Like no one is going to want to grow or learn or be better if you talk to them like they are stupid. And so just being a really like I really just wanted to be this like inclusive person that could help you to grow but also recognize that I'm still growing in the process and kind of just doing it together.
Well, you've
That
always
makes
been
sense.
honest about that. Absolutely. About your journey in balanced literacy and how you were totally steeped in it before you learned about the science of reading. And I
Yep.
think that helps teachers who feel so much shame and guilt for not knowing this,
Yep.
or for doing things that were not best practices all those years with their kids. And so you really do shine a light and say, this is not something to feel guilty about or feel shameful about. We're always learning and trying to grow and become better. And that's all we can do.
And we're still nobody has it right. Nobody has it 100% right. And we're all still growing. And there will be times where I'll post something and somebody will message me or they'll say something and then they're like, that's not quite right. And so I'll go into my stories and I'm like, you know what, y'all, I didn't get it quite right. I'm
Right.
not like purposely spreading misinformation, but nobody has all the truth all the time. So
So true. So, did you start Campbell Creates Readers after you had learned about the science of reading, or did you start it? Were you sharing any balanced literacy in the beginning?
I oh, that's a good question. Nope, I don't think I really did much at all. I think I had like a teachers pay teachers where,
Hmm.
yeah, I had a teachers pay teachers. I had some of the balance literacy stuff, but I didn't start sharing knowledge like that until 2020. And it's so funny the way it happened because I quit Facebook in 2020 because the election stuff was just too much for me. And I went on to Instagram because there wasn't as much. And I guess I just got really lucky at the time that I joined because I think there was such a need. And that's why I was able to grow, because not as many people were talking about it. But yeah, I think I didn't start talking online through social media until I was structured literacy. So I'd already made that transition somewhat.
That makes sense. Well, let's talk about that because
Yeah.
listeners of this podcast are both parents and teachers, usually preschool and kindergarten age. And so I would love for you to explain a little bit briefly about what balanced literacy is
Huh?
versus structured literacy, and then your journey of how you discovered
Sure.
structured literacy.
Yeah. So the hardest thing about balanced literacy is that we really don't have an agreed upon definition. So I'm going to go with what I know as balanced literacy as somebody who went through a lot of training on it. Balanced literacy for me was giving children enough time authentically reading and authentically writing until they became readers and writers. And it sounds great, right? Like if I just let you read enough, you're going to become a reader. If I just let you write enough, you're going to become a writer. We would carry our writers' notebooks around with us like they were like precious gems. And I was so stinking proud of that fact. And I would have my first graders have like 30 minutes of independent reading time every day. It sounds like a great idea. But what balanced literacy does is it minimizes the role of the teacher in order to give children all of that time. And this is problematic because kids, some of them, I would have been just fine with balanced literacy, but there are a large number of our students who, if they do not have explicit systematic instruction in a variety of areas, they're not going to become proficient readers. They're not going to become proficient writers. You can't just look at a child and say, today and every day, I want you to remember to put capital letters at the beginning and I want you to remember to put periods at the end. Like you just can't send kids off and hope that they are going to do these things. It makes sense intuitively, but it's just not how it actually happens for so many of our kids. So balanced literacy is giving them enough time as readers and writers to hopefully become readers and writers. Structured literacy has become really well known with the science of reading. The science of reading is not a program. It is just a body of literature that kind of helps to inform what we should be doing for our children. And structured literacy is like the actualization of it. It's like putting science of reading into practice. It means we have a lot of explicit instruction in things like phonics, phonemic awareness, all of those things. It means that we use a guided release of responsibility so that we are like, I do, we do, you do. Structured literacy gives children the time to read and to write, but it doesn't do it without first teaching them how to do it. And it seems like it's a small shift, but daggone it if it hasn't caused waves in education over the past 5-6 years. So when I started, I was very much balanced literacy. I just thought that if I could just give them a book that they loved, they would become readers. I really, truly thought that I was one book away from making every kid in my class a reader. But it's not that simple.
Right.
And when I first started switching was in 2018. I was chosen to do Orton-Gillingham training. And I'm just sitting there in this Orton-Gillingham training. I'm like, why didn't nobody teach me this? Why didn't nobody teach me this? I didn't know this. I didn't know what a digraph was. I honestly couldn't tell you what phonemic awareness was when I had 2 master's degrees in education. Like,
Same.
truly.
I only had 1 master's degree, but I am same as you. I had no idea what it was.
No. And so in 2018, I was Orton-Gillingham trained. And then the next year, the reading specialist for the county, I still remember the seat I was sitting in when we had this meeting. She sat us down and she had this it was like a Prezi or something like that. And it was this chart on structured literacy versus balanced literacy. And it was very clear that balanced literacy is what we shouldn't be doing. But she's sitting there listing all of these things that I do and hold dear, like cueing strategies, large amounts of independent reading. And I'm like, what? I remember thinking, like, you will take these cueing cards out of my cold, dead hands because I printed them in color and they're laminated and they're on a ring and I'm not getting rid of them. But I did what I try to always do, and that's I listened. And I always tell people, like, if you hear this and you get mad, that's okay. But we need to listen and we need to be honest about whether or not our kids are making the progress that we need them to make. And my kids were not. So if my kids were not making the progress they needed to make, I had no leg to stand on to keep doing what I was doing. So I just started making small shifts. Instead of just going through the levels, I would teach them phonics, those kinds of things that I would just start to incorporate. And it's just been little bit by little bit along the way until finally I think we're fully structured literacy now.
I love that story. And I wanted to circle back to what you were saying, how you described the amount of time the teacher is instructing. That was so eye-opening for me, the way you described that. That balanced literacy, we gave so much time to the students to read and write and less time to the teacher to explicitly instruct. And I think that's because there was this pushback that if a teacher is standing in front of the room and the students are in their desk, that is boring, that is old-fashioned. And so this shift happened where we gave the students so much time without the instruction and it didn't work. It didn't work at all.
Like, you're so right, because it felt like explicit instruction, like all of a sudden was a 4-letter word. And you weren't supposed to just stand there and teach kids. You're going to take away their agency. And it made me laugh when you were talking about like the small amount of time, because I remember my mini lesson could not be longer than 15 minutes, because if it was longer than 15 minutes, we're taking away from kids' ability to read and write. And in class, I remember asking, but like sometimes I can't even finish a picture book in 15 minutes.
Oh, whole group instruction was just out the window. Now that we have talked about structured literacy and balanced literacy, and we know that structured literacy makes the biggest difference for our kids, one of the pushbacks that you might hear is that structured literacy or science of reading is just a fad. It's a trend. It's a pendulum swing, especially from teachers who have been around for a while. They say, we've seen things come and go. This is just another shift. What would you say to those teachers who feel like this is just a trend?
I'm so glad you asked this question, because I was actually going to bring up a pendulum swing. That was the thing that I forgot. No, so I get it, because there have been these kind of big shifts in education. So in the 50s, when Rudolph Flesch came out with Why Johnny Can't Read, and he's like, y'all, he can't read because you're doing whole language. And it's at the same time that Ken Goodman is coming out with his his theories. And so it's interesting to see the rise of balanced literacy and then kind of like the fall of balanced literacy, because it had happened before. We'd had like the rise of whole language and the fall back from it. And so I get nervous because I do think it could become a pendulum if we are not smart about it. The thing about the science of reading is that it's not an opinion. It is facts. The
Right.
science of reading is facts about what we know about how children learn to read. The fear with a pendulum swing is when people aren't fully educated about it and they start to make decisions based off of like partial understandings. A good example of this is all of a sudden I am seeing this push where people don't want to do small groups.
Right.
And I'm like, I know we'd spent way too little time in whole group and we need to spend more time in whole group, but that doesn't mean that we just take away small groups. And so I think we have to be very mindful that we do not make these like whole scale decisions where we eliminate a practice without first thinking through the ramifications of it and whether or not it's best for kids. And I am so grateful for social media because I don't think it's going to be a pendulum swing because we have these easier ways to access information. And I think it will continue to just sort of like evolve and make these kind of like tiny shifts that we need if we stick with the facts and not
Right.
opinions. And I think that that's really what it comes down to, is that people like Fountas and Pennell and Lucy Calkins, they had theories and they had ideas about how kids learn to read that were not grounded in evidence. And so as long as we stick to the evidence, we will be able to continue to make these really big moves for kids. And I will say, I have personally seen how it can help kids. Like when I finally was fully into structured literacy, even my older kids, who I think at some point I just accepted like older kids in intervention were always going to be an intervention. And once I moved to structured literacy, I saw like I was able to take kids out of intervention and never have them go back in again. So as long as we follow the evidence and as long as we don't make these huge shifts without thinking it through, I think that we're going to be okay. I do. I think we're going to be all right.
I love that optimism. I agree with you. I think the term science of reading can be co-opted by companies and publishers saying we're science of reading aligned, and they might not be. So we just have to be smart and not just go with the trendy word. And I also think that the data is going to inform our decisions. You're seeing in intervention how it works. I think when we start seeing the whole scale data for districts and states, that it's going to be very hard to dispute that this is the best way to teach kids and this is the way that they learn best.
As long as we give it the time to work, and as long as we don't try to take these really quick, easy fixes. If you are like, why aren't we making progress? We've been doing structured literacy this whole year. It's going to take a couple years with a school. It is. It's not an easy, quick fix, but stick with it. And like you said, I'm so glad you said use your data. Data does not have opinions. Science does not have opinions. We speak to the data because that is what we know our children are able to do. And we use that to kind of guide our instruction. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, switching gears, not only do you have a phenomenal Instagram, let's talk about your podcast. I love listening to your podcast. It's called Creating Readers with Savannah Campbell. I'll definitely link it below. But one specific episode that I have sent to so many people is called Why English Does Make Sense. That is because ever since I was growing up, everybody says this. English doesn't make sense. It's such a crazy language. The spelling and the pronunciation of words, nothing is consistent. And there are so many funny reels about this.
There are. I follow
the word. Yes, dove. So this should be the word. And it's a totally different word that doesn't rhyme with dove, even though it's spelled a similar way.
Yes.
And so super funny to poke fun at the English language. I get it. But your podcast episode was explaining actually English does make sense. So I know you can't do a whole episode now, but can you just briefly tell us why English does make sense?
Yeah, of course. I think the easiest like elevator pitch for why English does make sense is we have to remember that English is this amalgamation of everything that we were before. So English really has four main tracks that it has come from, these four main layers. And basically all of English, most of English, comes from Anglo-Saxon, French, Latin, or Greek. And so when you see these patterns that don't make sense, the chances are is because it came from a different like language origin than what you would think. And English is what we call a morphophonemic language. And what that means is that our language really has two layers to it. We have the phonetic layer, so the word ship, ip. I know sh can be represented with an sh. I know I can be represented with an I, and I know p can be represented with a p. But English is also a morphemic language, which means we also have to deal with words at the morpheme or the meaning level. And let me give you an example of that. The suffix ed. The suffix ed can be pronounced id, d, or t. But no matter how it is pronounced, it will always maintain the meaning of making a verb past tense. So when we look at these spellings or these pronunciations that might seem crazy to us, the truth is that it's most likely preserving meaning. For example, if you think about the word sign, signal, assignation, all of those have the same root to them but they're pronounced different ways, but we maintain that spelling because that spelling gives us the meaning of the word. And in English, that's what we tend to do is we preserve the meaning through the spelling. Because how crazy would it be if all of those words that were related were purely spelled phonetic? Like then English would truly be crazy. So it's just keep in mind that the way we spell words is derived from the meaning, and then some of these other weird patterns and things are coming from a different language. Like the 100 most commonly used words in the English language are all derived from Anglo-Saxon. So words like from and of, where you're like, this doesn't even make sense. But what's happened is we've just been using them for so long that the pronunciation may have shifted, but we've maintained the spelling. So I could go forever about this, but yes, just remember, English is a morphophonemic language. Say it a couple times fast.
That's a perfect conversation at a party. Did you know English is a morphophonemic language?
Are you making fun of me because I do bring these up at parties, okay?
No, because I totally love it too. There are some of us that just like to geek out about this stuff. And my husband is not one of them. So when I go into these rants about the English language, I can see his eyes glaze over. I'm like, oh, not everyone finds this fascinating.
Right. I was at a game night, and I'll go ahead and explain Scribble O here too, but I was like, have y'all heard about the Scribble O?
Love Scribble O.
So Scribble O basically is words like brother and mother and come and love. They sound like they should have a U, but the medieval scribes, when you're writing these words like L-U-V-E in cursive, all kind of goes together. Brother, B-R-U-T-H, it all kinds of comes together. So the scribes intentionally changed the U to an O so that it was easier to read. So English does make sense. It's just quirky.
It's just
crazy.
Quirky.
It's quirky.
And even when I learned you were bringing up suffix ed, why it says t or d or id, there's a reason. It depends on the sound before, if it's a voiced or unvoiced sound. That just blew my mind when I learned that as an adult in my 30s.
Well, and I think ed is a really clear example of how we have to attend to both the meaning layer and the phonetic layer. Because when I first learned about that, all I did was I taught my kids like, ed says id after a d or a t, but then they would still spell it id. And so I realized that although I had taught them the proper way to pronounce it, they weren't able to generate it because I hadn't connected it to the meaning layer yet. And as soon as I said, hey, what do we know is always past tense? All of a sudden, looked is no longer L-O-O-K-T. They're putting the ed because you've both connected the phonetic layer and the meaning level.
I love that. That is awesome. So we've talked about meaning. We've talked about phonics, of course. Let's switch to vocabulary because I think that is a topic that doesn't get enough attention about, especially in structured literacy. And some people who are fighting against the science of reading say there's not enough vocabulary development. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I'm going to speak specifically to the littles for this because I know that that's what your
Perfect.
podcast is. And I know that there have been some limitations to the Hart-Risley study. Do you know about the Hart-Risley study
I
from
do. Yes.
1995? All right, I was going to talk a little bit about that if that's
I'd love
okay.
that. Yes,
Okay, I
please.
wanted to kind of illustrate why vocabulary is so important at the younger level. So basically, Hart and Risley, they did this study and it was over 3 years. So they went with 42 different families from all different socioeconomic statuses. And they followed their children from 9 months old to 3 years old. And what they would do is one time a month, they would show up to their house for an hour and they would record everything. And this is a quote done by the children, to them, and around them. And the findings from it were just unbelievable. So the highest socioeconomic status family, on average, the kids heard around 2,000 words within an hour. The lowest SES families heard about 600. And then if you extrapolate that data to a year, that means that the kiddos from the highest SES family heard about 11 million words in a year, where the kids from the lowest SES family only heard about 3 million words a year. So you think about just the difference in the number of words these children hear, and it shows up in their vocabulary because at the age of 3, those kiddos from the highest SES family, their vocabulary was at about 1,100 words, where the kids from the lowest SES family, their vocabulary is about 500 words. And I don't think we talk enough, like you said, about vocabulary. And there's a reason for it. I think it's really easy when you see on TV, they need to know sight words, right? Like sight words are easy. I can get sight word flashcards. Okay, they need to know their letters. That's easy. And we kind of like go towards these things where we can find something physical to work with it
Mhm.
without realizing that the things that we say orally, without even having to think about putting a text in front of them, has a big impact. And then just the vocabulary that our kids get when we talk to them every day in complete sentences, when we look at them, when we ask them about their day, when we expand upon their sentences when they say something. It makes a huge difference when you are reading books to kids, talking about the different words that are in there. My daughter, like the other day, I was so impressed because we were reading her little dinosaur book because what 5-year-old doesn't love dinosaurs? And she goes, Mommy, that animal, that dinosaur only eats plants. And then she was like, and this one eats meat. And I asked her, I was like, well, how do you know this one only eats plants? And she said, well, it doesn't have any teeth. It just has a beak. And I was like, huh, okay. And I was
I
like, well,
love that.
we call that an herbivore. And then through every page we looked at, we said whether it was an herbivore or carnivore. Every single page. I was like, do they eat meat or do they eat plants or do they eat plants or do they eat both? And then we talked about that. So I would just really encourage parents and caregivers of young children to be mindful about the fact that the vocabulary we use every day with our kids, it matters. The vocabulary we use when we read books, it's not about can they come up with the craziest random word. It's just can we teach them enough words about the world?
Absolutely. So in the Letters Early Childhood Training, they talk a lot about this. The 3 T's: tune in, talk more, and take turns. Talk about the
All right, say
difference
that again. Say
between,
that again.
oh, the 3 T's: tune
Okay.
in, talk more, and take turns.
Oh, I love that. I'm writing it
Yes.
down.
And the difference between academic talk versus more casual talk. There's parallel talk. There's just so many ways that we can enhance vocabulary, especially for our little ones. And I know academic words are more often found in picture books. I think I read a study that said even adults, when they speak to each other, don't use as high level vocabulary words as children's picture books for the most part, because we
Yes.
all kind of use the same words every day in our speech. But these picture books, when we're reading them to our kids, they can expand their vocabularies so much. And I think you're right. I think that is not pointed out enough to parents, the importance of talking all day long with their little ones.
Yeah, and going back to what you had said too about oral conversation, about 2,000 words, I think, is the number of what we use in our oral vocabulary, like even as adults. But then the average adult has between like 40 and 70,000 words in their vocabulary. And so all of the rest of the words have to come from things that we are reading. Academic vocabulary is simply different than what we say out loud. It just is.
That's so interesting. Yeah, we really limit ourselves with what we are
Mhm.
saying out loud, even though we have so many more in our brains.
Yeah, I had somebody the other day where I was talking with my neighbors or something. I was like, that's like a pejorative term, and they were like, pejorative, and it was like this big deal, and I was like, fine, we don't call people that.
So fancy.
And it's funny because it's true. That's what we say. We're like, what did you just say? But then if
Yep.
you read it, you don't bat an eye.
Yep. Oh, that's so true. Well, you mentioned your daughter. She's 5. She's in kindergarten. I would just love to know, how's it going now that you are on the other side of the desk? Instead of being a teacher, now you are the parent of a kindergartner.
Um, Gosh, this might actually make me get emotional because
Oh,
as a mom and a teacher, it's been crazy to get to see it from the other side. And I just have to say how incredibly thankful I am for kindergarten teachers. Oh my gosh.
yes.
Like just and I am a smart woman and I know how to teach kids. And my daughter went to kindergarten and I thought I had taught her, but oh my gosh, the things that her teacher is teaching her right now, I'm just eternally grateful. Although I am a little hurt when sometimes she comes home and says, Miss Brake taught me. And I'm like, ma'am, I've been teaching you this since you were
Yes.
3, but sure, let's give it to your teacher. But no,
Always.
kindergarten has just been very different for me. I kind of like seeing things come home from like the other side of it, or seeing my daughter's test scores coming in. We have a new universal screener in Virginia, so I was like dying to see what her universal screener scores is. My daughter is very different from me. She's very shy. So like this week we just came back from Christmas break, and Wednesday when we came back she cried, and then today they had to like pull her off of me to get her out of the car. But
Oh,
once she's there, I know that she's
yeah.
fine, but it's definitely a different world seeing it as a mom, and I just can't say enough how grateful I am for the teachers in her life and for the teachers that will come into her life, because they spend all day with my daughter and they love my daughter, and I know they love my daughter, and that means the world to me that my daughter like is loved. The rest
I
of
love
it,
that.
like, it's important, but the fact that they love her like they do is really matters to me.
That is so sweet. I agree. It's such an amazing experience to come full circle from teaching I taught before I had kids to now being able to volunteer and sub. And I love that now I can volunteer the way parents did in my classroom. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't think parents understand how meaningful that is. But when
Yep.
you're a teacher and you are having so many things to do and you have a parent who's willing to even cut out some laminating or make some copies, it makes such a huge difference.
Yeah,
And it is
it does.
nice to be able to do this now on the other side.
I agree because I'm subbing now too. And so like one day I was going to the school just to like meet my daughter for lunch, and the principal and like the community person were like talking about, "Oh gosh, we got to get this bulletin board." I was like, "I'll be here Friday. Let me
Yes, yes,
You
let
don't
me
have
do
to
it.
bend my arm. Let me get this bulletin board going for you people."
And how is that for you now being home working on Campbell Creates Readers full time?
It's very bittersweet.
Yeah.
I never dreamed of doing anything other than being a reading specialist, and I always said that I would go where I could do the most good. And things just kind of changed, and I found it harder to get to make the impact that I wanted to make. And so I kind of just made the decision, like, I'm gonna step back and I'm gonna try something else. But I really miss it. I'm not even gonna lie. I don't miss the politics behind education. I don't miss the planning. I don't miss being away from my family, but I miss those kids so much. So getting to sub has really been nice, because now even just going a few times to my daughter's school to sub, like the kids even know me now.
Yes.
And it's different, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay out of the classroom for forever, but for right now I made the right choice for my family. It's hard. And
Yes.
I'm just so thankful for teachers. So
They're the
thankful for them.
best. Well, you're
Hmm.
doing so much good. You're doing so much good with your business. You have so many offers for
Thanks.
teachers to help make their lives easier. And I know that your goal is to help these kids have this future where they are strong in literacy. Not that they necessarily love reading, but that they are proficient at reading. And then they can chase their dream, whatever that dream is. Because we know that
Yes.
not all kids have the dream of curling up with a book on the couch on a
No.
Saturday. And that's okay.
I will never understand why people insist that kids have to love reading. I've never met a math teacher that is like, at the end of this year, you're all going to love math. You're going to love multiplication. You're going to love division. It's going to be the best. But for some reason, we put that on reading. And just because we value reading as something that brings joy to our life, that doesn't mean that it has to be for all of our kids. And I really think that because so many teachers did learn to read so easily, and we do love reading so much. I love to read. It wasn't probably until I met my husband, who is dyslexic and also hates reading, that I was like, oh, wait, you can be successful, you can be happy, and you don't have to love reading. It is not about whether or not you love reading, although I would be so happy if you did. It is about, can I help you to become proficient enough in life so that you can do whatever you want? I need you to be able to read and spell well enough that you can go write your college application. I want you to be able to read well enough that when a contract comes your way, you can read through it and not be blindsided by like the small print. I need you to be able to be literate, because we live in a world where literacy determines what you are able to do in life. And so if you learn to love it along the way and you want to have a book club with me later, great. But that's not the point of it. The point is, can you function as a human being? And without reading, we can't. My great grandmother never learned to read or write. And I remember going to Pizza Hut, and my granny would like sit there and read the menu to her. When she had to sign something, she would just put an X on it.
Wow.
And that's a very obvious sign of illiteracy, but we have so many people walking around with functionally literate, just barely getting by. And I just don't want that for our kids. I don't want our kids to have to struggle. I don't need them to be geniuses. I just don't want them to have to struggle so hard.
And we have that hope. We have the plan. We have it in place. We are rolling it out. And I love your hope for the future. And I love your optimism. And I know that what you are doing right now is going to make a difference for kids who aren't even born yet. How crazy is that? I love
And
that.
I've been really hard on myself about leaving teaching, because you feel like you lose a bit of legitimacy when you leave teaching. But I'm really realizing that if we want this to stick, what we have to do is we have to make sure that the teachers are educated, because curriculums can change, laws can change, but the one thing that they can never ever take away from you is your knowledge. And if you know what the research says about how kids learn to read, you're good. They can't take that from you.
And just remember, we all have roles to play in the lives of these kids. And some of us have roles to play in the classroom, and some of us have roles to play outside of the classroom. But one does not diminish the other. They're all important.
Right. And if my role right now is to help bring that education to teachers, I'm okay with that too.
Yes. Oh, Savannah, this has just been so much fun. I told you in an email, I feel like I already know you, even though we hadn't met in person, because I love following you online. As we wrap up, I would love to know what your biggest takeaway you would like the listeners to take away from this episode.
I would say the biggest takeaway for me is that we don't have to do it all at once. Remember, I talked about the balanced literacy. It was a very much a struggle, and just that we can take these small steps, and we just need to always stay rooted in the data and the children. We've got to keep our focus on these kids and what they are able or not able to do as a result of our instruction. And that's what I really want us to remember, is it's never about us. It's always about them.
Always. Oh, that was perfect. Perfect way to end. My very last question, since this is the Littles Love Learning podcast, what do you love most about working with littles?
I mean, this is selfish, but I'm not going to lie. I like getting told I'm pretty every day.
That is the first time anyone has said that answer, and it might be my absolute favorite.
But it's so true. Oh, and they're just, with littles though, I mean, there's just so much joy, and they're so excited, and you get a chance to get them before this world has had a chance to take any of that from you. And I will cherish that forever, and then send them back to class, because kindergarten teachers that deal with that for 7 hours a day are just, whoo, you are next level amazing, because it is a lot. But yeah.
Oh, Savannah, you are such a bright light. Thank you so much for your time. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you, and I will put all of the links below.
Thank you. Okay, so on Instagram, it's Campbell Creates Readers. I have a website that's called Campbell Creates Readers. You'll never believe that. But then I also have a podcast called not Campbell Creates Readers. It's called Creating Readers with Savannah Campbell because I want to make this shift away from me. It's not about me creating readers. It's about what everybody gets to do to create readers. And I'm just here to help. So Campbell Creates Readers or Creating Readers is my podcast I started this year.
Perfect. I will link all of that below. Thank you again so much.
Of course. Thank you so much.